Welcome to the Second Bite podcast, where we talk with top entrepreneurs and CEOs about creating valuable companies through creative transactions. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome to another episode of the Second Bite podcast. My name is Todd Taskey. I am your host of the Second Bite podcast, a podcast that people really love because we have the opportunity to talk to very accomplished people, entrepreneurs in the digital space, digital marketing space that perhaps you have not heard of before, but have accomplished quite a bit in their career. And today I've got a wonderful guest from Perform CB, Erin, the CEO of the company, here with me as my guest today. Erin, super nice to have you.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here, Todd.
Yes, I'm looking forward to our conversation. Before we jump into that, I do want to thank our sponsor, the good people at TriVest. TriVest is a private equity group based out of Miami, have been around for 40 years. They've done over 300 investments. They are a private equity group that is targeted and created for founders and family-owned firms. And they've got a ton of experience. I like them for a couple of reasons. A, they're a very good group of people. But they have two funds that I like a lot. They've got a traditional private equity fund. They have a fund called their Discovery Fund that focuses on businesses between $1 million and $3 million of EBITDA that want to be platform companies, which is very unusual in the space. So they're terrific for that. They also have another fund that will allow businesses in that $2 to $5 or $6 million EBITDA range that want to take chips off the table, but do it as a minority so they retain majority control of their business. So TriVest, trivest.com/secondbite. They've set up a landing page which has a bunch of information for viewers and listeners, so you can check them out. Erin, again, thank you for being with us. I have known of Perform CB since back when it was just CB for ClickBank. And there's a long history here, and I want to start to unpack that. But before we do that, introduce all of us to Perform CB. Give me a rough idea on how big the company is today, but really tell me a little bit about what you do and the customers that you serve most often.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one correction there. It's not uncommon for people to think of us in our CB days, but CB stands for Click Booth, not ClickBank, we said. Yeah. So we recently rebranded to Perform CB, and Perform CB is the premier digital customer acquisition solution and the only company delivering smarter, safer performance marketing at massive scale. So when brands work with us, they only pay when they get a real customer, guaranteed. That's literally the payment model, cost per pricing. So cost per lead, cost per engagement, cost per install, cost per sale, cost per action. That's the model. We have been around since 2002, and we have roughly 140 employees all over the globe at this point.
You say massive scale. Tell me what that means.
Yeah, so in some instances, we are the sole customer acquisition channel for businesses. And we'll talk a little bit about that, I think, in people we serve. But we'll work with large Fortune 500 brands, agencies, D2C brands, and entrepreneurs, app marketers. And for some of those folks, we are their customer acquisition strategy completely.
Wow. Now, a lot of the people that we have on the podcast are men and women that have started a business, built it, sold a big chunk of it or sold most of it, and then they've stayed on for an earn-out or for a second bite. You, much different. You were literally an employee right out of college that has gone through the ranks to become the CEO of the organization. Can you just give us a brief history of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined the business 5 days after graduating from college in an entry-level role. I paid my way through college and I bartended to make my way through school. And so I knew that I needed a job right when I graduated. So I started interviewing all over the place in March of my senior year. I went to the University of Florida and I have a degree in advertising. And at that point, I found the company, which, like you said, at that point was named ClickBooth. I interviewed with the founder, and I just loved the model. He said, "Hey, what we're doing here is really cool. Marketers only pay us when they get a customer." And I had gone to school for advertising and learned all about cost per impression, and cost per click was starting to be cool then. But I was like, my goodness, marketers only pay when they get a customer. Guaranteed results, totally defined. I'm so interested. The other thing I really liked about the business was it had a New York or San Francisco pace and excitement, but it was based in Florida. And I am a Florida native. And to have an opportunity to build a career here in my home state without having to go to New York or San Francisco was really attractive to me. So I accepted the role. And like I said, I started here 5 days after graduating from college, worked my way up the ranks. I was one of the first 10 employees. So it really is like that quote where they say, if you're offered a seat on a rocket ship, don't ask what seat, just get on it. You wear a lot of hats. I got to learn all about the business. I focused on our vendor side of the business when I started, but then ultimately took over both sides of the client business, became president of the business, and ultimately CEO of the business. And it's been really, really fun and exciting. I've shepherded the business through a platform build. So we're on our own proprietary technology. I hired our CTO who helped us create that. I've sold the business twice now to 2 different private equity firms. So I've been able to be part of 2 sale processes. But really, really fun ride.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about that for a few minutes if we can. Both of the transactions you did, I know, were with private equity groups. The first one was with Centerlink. And then Centerlink built the business further and sold it to Behringer.
Correct.
So let's go back to Centerlink. What year was that? And kind of give me a rough idea of the size of the business and what was your role in the company at that time?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the time at which we began our sale process, I was CEO of the business. We started the sale process in 2015. Completely 100% bootstrapped and founder owned. And our founder was very entrepreneurial. So he had started other businesses and he and I were running all of those businesses all together and really decided to divide and conquer. And so I took ownership in leadership of what is now Perform CB, what was then ClickBooth. Totally focused on that business and he focused on some of his other businesses. So I was CEO when we started the sale process.
So you had been president / CEO of ClickBooth at that time.
Yep.
For how long before you went into a process to sell?
Probably in name 12 months, acting probably 2 or 3 years.
Okay. And you're what, 5, 6 years out of college at this point?
Yep.
Okay. So I would assume didn't know much about private equity, didn't know much about doing transactions. What surprised you most, and what was kind of the most memorable thing that you took away from that process?
I think the thing that surprised me the most was that the folks that ultimately bought us didn't ask a lot of questions. They asked really good questions during their presentation, but they probably asked a total of 5 questions, to the point where myself and the team that was presenting, I was like, well, they either loved us or they hated us completely. And then they were the right offer for us. And it was a surprise to us for sure, because we'd sat through many management presentations at that point, and you definitely get a lot of questions typically, especially in our business, which isn't a very common business out there. So there's a lot of jargon and how does this work and what's this do for the technology? So that was definitely a surprise.
And do you ascribe that to them understanding the business and the space very well, and so therefore they were limited in their questions, or was there something else to it?
I think that they understood the business really well and were very smart. So they were in working with Ken at Centerlane afterwards and being able to be on the other side of the table with him as he looked at acquiring businesses. He was always focused on what is the risk point with this business, and do I have something special I can add to help reduce the risk point on this business? And so he had a very concise and targeted list of questions that we would go at and try to understand a business. Very rational, very logical, and very methodical in the way that he looked at business.
And so this is 2015. And roughly how big was the business then? Do you recall?
Yeah, so we had about 30 employees. Ultimately, we completed the transaction in 2016. So we started the process in 2015, big sale process, big pitches, and then sold to Centerlane in the summer of 2016. We had about 30 employees at that point.
And can you give me a rough idea on what revenue was back then?
So we were sub 10 million in EBITDA at that point.
Of the EBITDA.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. And so now, typically when private equity buys a company, they want management to stay. So they bought the founder out. Mm-hmm. Now Erin's still the CEO. Was from an economic standpoint, did they kind of reload in terms of equity for you and for the team to say, hey, we're going to go take the next deal and everyone's going to do great? Or did you have equity to roll forward?
Yeah, so they were very, I think, fair and kind to us. We were a young management team, largely untested at that point, and they gave us a great equity package, which put all of us in a wonderful position when we completed our next sale this last time around.
Gotcha. Now, so then that was Centerlane, and Centerlane you were owned for how long?
So they bought the business in June of 2016 and sold the business in April of 2021.
Gotcha. So they were about 5 years.
Yep.
Was there anything that you learned or that you observed in working with them where you said, look what they're doing. I see what they're doing. I see how they're creating value for this business. That was surprising to you or you didn't understand beforehand? Or did they just do more of the really good stuff and focus on that?
It was definitely transformational for the business. So like I said, we were bootstrapped and founder-owned, founders and entrepreneur, and brilliant at starting businesses, but limited experience in scaling businesses and some of the pieces that come around that. And so by having Centerlane in the picture, we did a lot of things that we hadn't previously done. So we grew up as a business. We were a carve out. We hired a CFO that was completely dedicated to our business. We did 3 acquisitions. In fact, we completed an acquisition that I had been talking to prior to selling to private equity, but we didn't have the funds to complete the transaction, right? The founder wanted cash, and we didn't have that kind of cash flow to be able to support an acquisition.
You said you were a carve out. What did you mean by that?
So the entrepreneur owned multiple businesses, and so there was a shared services model. When we were carved out, we left the business and didn't bring over our legal team. We didn't bring over the CFO, marketing team, all of those services we had to reestablish. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. And Centerlane helped you establish and build all those.
Yep. Yeah.
And when you scale a business, so over that 5 years, you were sub 10 million. When Everlane exited, can you give me a rough idea? Did they double the business or triple the business over 5 years?
Even better returns than that, for sure. So they got great returns. I can't get too detailed on it. Ken definitely wouldn't like that, but better than what you just said.
That's great. So, it's always interesting to me that entrepreneurs are great at building a business, and private equity is great at building businesses, right? And maybe you could comment on this because the thought process is different, right? Can you just kind of comment on maybe how that is different and what you observe from working with 2 different groups?
Yeah. So I describe it right now that our partners have been perfect for the life stage that we were in. So Centerlink was generalist. And that was perfect for our life stage because we are experts on internet marketing. And we know that inside and out, and that's what the management team specializes in. We get internet marketing and we get technology. And so Centerlink didn't come to the table trying to tell us what we should know about internet marketing. They came to the table going, hey, businesses of your size need this kind of infrastructure. when we think about acquisitions, we need to think about them this way. So they were able to take the playbook that they've seen over and over and over again and just speed up our learning curve on all sorts of things that were very business focused, but not focused on our space or what made us special or our competitive edge. And we would have wasted so much time and spun so many wheels trying to figure out all of those things from scratch. How do we hire a CFO? What does a due diligence process look like? We would have had to make all of that up. But they knew it already. They had a playbook for it.
So when we talk about infrastructure, was there something in particular that Centerlane did? And I know that they will apply this probably to most of their portfolio companies. Well, do you remember what it was that were kind of the first action plans that they said you got to do, and here's why?
Yeah. So hiring a CFO was really pivotal for us because we were a carve out, but also because we had never written a budget as a business. Now, we wrote one for the sale process, and maybe you've experienced this, but we were not running the business based on a budget. What does that look like? It was entrepreneur owned. What can we cash flow? How big can we grow? How fast? Not we're going to be methodical and look at KPIs and plot out what that looks like. And the ability to do that as a business, I think, is a game changer because
why is that a game changer? Because, CFO and finance and blah, people don't, it's not that much fun and excitement, but mature businesses all have it.
Oh yeah, they all have it because when you understand how you're making money, why you're making money, and what it is costing you to support making that money, you can make completely different decisions as a business. You can feel really confident hiring a rock star sales rep because you know that you've got the plan and the ROI to back that out. You can feel really confident targeting a specific client or exiting a space because it's too expensive. Like you've got the data at your fingertips to make really good business decisions. And I think it just firepowers you.
Do you have an example of that? Vertical you exited or somebody important you hired or somebody you wanted to target?
Yeah. So, it would definitely come down to acquisitions that we've made. We were the platform business and knew that we wanted to add on to grow. And we wanted to get into the mobile space. We are really good at web as our bread and butter to begin with, but we saw the writing on the wall. Everything is shifting to mobile, and we can't not have a capability there. So we said, well, we can home grow that, and here's what the model looks like and how far we could get, or we can go out and we can look at acquisitions for it. And by investing this amount of money, it can firepower us. And really get us to an exciting growth level and get us in conversations with much larger clients to handle their app and their web acquisition budget. And so it gave us the confidence to run a full process, look at all the mobile assets out there, and ultimately acquire Imperio.
Now, so Centerlane owns the company, but Erin's got to integrate it and make it all work. So how much of the process and the decision making was this, and how much was it, Erin, here's what we're going to do your best to make it work?
So very much like I said, they knew that we were the experts in running businesses and internet marketing, and so they relied on us in terms of, do we want to do this acquisition? How do we want to do this acquisition? How do we present this to clients? How do we market it? How do we integrate the team? That was all us. It was the back end looking at the financials, looking at the strategic advantages and going, should we do this acquisition, that they were helpful in. Now I'll contrast that because our next set of partners is Behringer Capital, and they're perfect for the life stage of the business that we're in now. Every single one of them have been operators of a business. So they know, like truly in the trenches, what it is like to acquire a company, how to integrate a company. They've been there and done that. And they've not only have they done it, they have executives and residents that have surrounded me. And so I can pick up the phone at any point and call them and say, hey, when you ran into this challenge, what did you do? How did you handle it? What should I do? Or I'd love an introduction to this person. Can you make it happen? And so that relationship, with Centerlane, I was talking to them once a week, and they knew exactly what was going on in the business very transparently. They got daily reporting. But with Behringer, I'm texting back and forth with my contact. We'll call each other, multiple times a day, quick chat, like, hey, what do you think about this? How about this? Very collaborative. And he's also working with more of our broader management as well.
I'd like your comment on this, because I know with a lot of entrepreneurs, what I hear is, yeah, you sell to private equity, they're constantly in your business all the time. Most of the people that I know are actually in it. They value that and relish that. It's not like filling out TPS reports. I've got really, really smart people that I can turn to and ask. Can you comment on that at all?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's phenomenal to have these folks. I think as a CEO or a high level executive at any business, it's nice to be able to talk to people who have been there and done that, because there's few people that you can turn to ask difficult questions. You can build up a really good network. Ultimately, that network sometimes includes some of your competitors, so you have to keep things closer to the vest. You've got your folks that you work with every day, but they report to you. And so sometimes there's some things you don't want to discuss with them. So being able to tap your PE partners for the bigger challenges or the cooler ideas and go, how do you think about this? It just supercharges what you're able to do and it increases the brain power. I think if you've got a big ego and you want to make call every shot and you don't want to be questioned, then it could be challenging for you. And so maybe if you're an entrepreneur and you've always been used to, I write my own destiny and I don't have to answer to anyone, I could see it being an adjustment. But if you take a really open mind and just go, we all have the same goal, we're all partners, we all want this thing to grow, and just take it really humbly and try to co-create, then it can be a lot of fun.
That's great to hear. And Behringer, well, first of all, Centerlane has a wonderful reputation. Not surprised that that they had a success and that you were successful with them, and not surprised that they shared in that success. They have a reputation for that as well. Behringer has a tremendous reputation in the digital space, from Match to all their other successes, and I'm familiar with Perry and Gill and the team that's there. So I would think if I was on the outside and I looked at the opportunity to kind of partner with or become part of Perform CB and a Behringer portfolio company, that would be pretty exciting. Mm-hmm. So anyone listening would not forgive me for asking. I'm sure you guys have a list of things that you're excited about that acquisition will call for to grow the business. Some of it is always size. A lot of it is strategic. Can you share any of what your thoughts or plans are around strategic acquisitions moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've acquired 3 businesses to date, and it's something that we feel pretty successful at doing, and it definitely is part of our playbook as we move forward. We've got a lot of organic growth opportunities in front of us, but in terms of acquisitions that we're looking at, and we are looking heavily at acquisitions right now, we are thinking about the broader performance marketing space. And so what does that mean? That means somebody who, when they work with marketers, can very much prove out the results that they're driving. Could be on a true cost per acquisition, cost per install, cost per lead type of basis, or it could be, hey, we're taking on some media risk and we're backing out to what your end customer acquisition goal is. So very performance driven is one piece of the puzzle that we're looking at and excited about. Another thing that we're thinking about is owned and operated properties. So people that own properties or own media properties that help to drive customer acquisition. That's another area that we're interested in.
What's an example of that, Erin?
Yeah, so that's going to be a lot of times. You'll see it in the auto insurance space, right? Where they've created a brand that helps people learn about saving money on their auto insurance. And so people will visit that site to learn how to save money on auto insurance or other things. They've created a whole property around, helping people save money. Ultimately, usually they're monetizing their traffic by selling it to a lot of what our end marketers might be looking for, because financial is one of our biggest verticals. And then we are also interested in some technologies that could be around measurement or tracking. We've got a 35-person development team, so we're pretty good on the technology front, but we like to be aware of what's out there and see what could be complementary. And then pay-per-call is another area that we're really interested in. So something that we picked up in the Digital Remedy acquisition was a pay-per-call internal media division. And so growing that out is something that we're looking at as well.
Got it. And as you and you will be, I assume, kind of continue to be instrumental in those acquisitions and the strategy around them.
Yep, absolutely. So I was on a management meeting on Friday. I've got another one tomorrow. I'm in there. And then we've got Gil from Centerlane that joins us. Our chief strategy officer is involved. And then one of the executives in residence also helps us out too.
Gotcha. So if we can, let's just take a step back on a couple of things that I wanted to cover a little bit. One concern I get with a lot of clients when we're helping them with a transition or an acquisition is the question about when do I involve my team, my executives, the inner circle, so to speak. So you've been through this now a couple of times.
Yep.
What advice would you give to the owner of a business as to when is the right time to involve your top executives?
From a top executive standpoint, I think that if it's something that you're considering, you want folks to be aware that you're considering it and why you're considering it. You're considering it because you want an exit. You're considering it because you think it's what's going to take the business further. Like, what are the drivers behind it? Because it's helpful in their decision-making process and how they might guide and run the business. So that I would definitely get across. The first sale process took a little bit longer because our founder wasn't 100% certain that he wanted to sell. So there was some starting and stopping, and he wasn't exactly sure why he wanted to sell. And so I think being really honest with yourself about the whys, so that then you can get your team under the fold, is very helpful. It helps them prioritize.
In the first transaction, when you were obviously essentially a founder, you were the leader of that business. When were you involved in his thinking about, I'm going to sell the business?
So, like random, I might do this one day. Those conversations were pretty open. Then he and his CFO hired bankers, and then I was brought under the fold. And so that's another point is I think if you are going to expect someone else to run the sale process for you, because he wasn't involved in the sale process at all. I led it. He didn't meet any of he wasn't in the management presentations. Ultimately, he met our end buyer, like a quick, hey, nice to know you, happy we're doing this transaction together. And so I think I should have been involved when we were selecting the bankers to make sure there was a fit with the bankers and a full understanding. I think we ultimately had good bankers, so that did work out, but I would recommend, being involved in the banker selection process.
And then when did you fill in your team right below you?
So it was myself and the folks that headed up our sales teams that ultimately presented. And they knew pretty quickly because we all worked together to pull the data. And that was necessary at that point. In the second round, we waited as long as possible to tell. So like me and my CFO, we got to meet, we got to interview the bankers, we got to choose, et cetera. And then the team having gone through a sale process once before and understanding we were private equity owned and the clock was ticking, knew we were going to sell at some point. But we got them involved once it became clear that we had a serious buyer that wanted to meet them, because processes can be extremely distracting and overwhelming for folks. And you want the business to be running as good, if not better than always during a sale process.
Yeah, that's super true. It'd be interesting to hear how a professional owner notifies you and your CFO. So did Centerlane say, hey, we're going to own this thing for 5 years, and then come back and say, hey, we're 4 years into it now, we're getting ready? Or how did that come about?
Yeah, so Ken was really respectful and gave me a heads up probably at the 4-year mark and said, as when we originally bought you guys, we said it's going to be a 5 to 8 year hold. So I want to give you a heads up that we're about a year out from that. I love the business. I'm so excited in what we've accomplished. We need to start thinking about what the next partner might look like for all of us. And he's like, the more that we can get ahead of that, the better spot that you and your team can be in. And so very upfront reminder, this is why, and some of those pieces. And then, we started being thoughtful about it. And he even said, as that year progressed, he said, okay, we're getting even closer. 6 months out, in the next 6 months, we're probably going to want to pick an investment banker so that we can start a process. And so very respectful in terms of giving heads up and process. Behringer as well is like, we plan to own the business for 5 years. And it's interesting because even now we're talking about, okay, when we sell the business, what value will we have created? What can we accomplish in 3 years? What can we accomplish in 4 years? So that we've got data to prove out what we've accomplished. How should we be organizing files now so that when we go to sell, it's easier?
And when you went to the second process, you wound up with Behringer, which is a private equity group. Did you also consider strategic acquirers? And did you have concern that if we went to a strategic, Erin would be out of a job eventually and prefer private equity? Or how were you thinking about all that?
Yeah, so we did consider strategics, and Behringer was almost a nice mix of that because I feel like they brought the strategic insights, but with the PE backing. So we did consider strategics, but ultimately, walking into the process, we felt like it was going to go to a private equity firm. I think next time around, we think that we will likely go to a strategic. And we're thinking about that from the business building standpoint to say, what, as we do this, what strategic might buy us. I think that, I love this business and I love to provide value to it. I think that if we sell to a strategic, typically the multiple is going to be higher. And so I'll experience a nice event at that point. If they have something that I can do that's engaging for me, then I'm happy to stick around. And if I need to sail off into advising, I guess that's the next step for me next time.
Gotcha. What advice would you give as you think about now a process you've been through professionally twice? Talk just briefly about the importance of the LOI stage, how much negotiation goes on there versus in deal documents, and how kind of in the trenches you were on those points.
Yeah, I would say that surprisingly little negotiation seems to go on at the LOI stage. There's this, are they a real buyer? Have they asked us the questions that they need to ask us for us to feel like they really understand the business? Those were things that we thought about pre-LOI stage. Then in the LOI stage, I think that a lot of the negotiation happens amongst the bankers and the PE firms and doesn't come through to management, but it seems minimal. Then, and the actual, once the contract comes out, that seems to be where a lot of the negotiation and the finer points of what's the working capital peg, et cetera. But usually at that point, everyone has agreed that they like the fundamentals of the deal and they want to figure out solutions to making it happen. It's just all about solving the 100 problems that come up between
right.
We've all agreed and close.
It's really interesting because there's a strategy among some buyers known as clearing the room, right? So I don't need to ask a lot of questions. I just need to put up a number that will clear the room, lock you under a letter of intent, which means there's a no shop period in there. So you're off the market now, and now we can really begin to negotiate. So it's interesting that you pick up on that because how well somebody understands your business means that there's fewer opportunity for surprises that will blow up a deal. Was there anything in particular that you kind of recognized as key questions, or did you recognize some people during the process that you felt like just didn't really understand the business and therefore you discounted their offer?
Oh, absolutely. So it's an internet marketing business in the performance marketing space. So it's a subset of what people know, right? You don't go to a dinner party and usually run into somebody who can talk the ins and outs of it. And so people that didn't ask good questions about what the client mix looked like, or feel like they had an understanding of how the traffic worked, or were just like, cool, digital marketing business, here you go, here's a multiple. Ken and I definitely collaborated on that. And he would say, do you think these people are serious buyers? And I would understand based on their questions, if they were serious buyers or not, and communicate that to him. And he and I knocked some people out of the process, even if it looked like a potentially lucrative deal, because we realized that they were more tire kickers and probably not going to get the deal done. And
also a risk to even get to close, right?
Yep. Oh, yeah.
So a couple of last questions as I'll bring us in here. To me, in many respects, it's remarkable that you were a recent college graduate and you got yourself to the position that you are now. Do you do you find that that was more challenging for you as a woman than perhaps it would have been for a man? I mean, it's been a while that you've been in this business and it's been male dominated. What's your experience like that been?
I've got the stories I could tell you where I go and meet with bankers and I ask where the bathroom is and they literally have no idea where the women's bathroom is on their floor. Like that still happens today. But for the most part, I am seeing more and more women around the deals table, so that's been exciting. I have had the experience of being on maternity leave when the first deal was closed. So I was pregnant during the sale process, and
Wow.
then on leave leave, working from home with a newborn. So that made the second process easy because I didn't have a newborn. I wasn't, pregnant. So by comparison, it felt pretty easy. So it's nice. I feel privileged to be able to bring those perspectives to the table and be at the table to have those conversations and represent women so that hopefully we can have more and more women at the table too.
Excellent. Um, there's a lot of information out there about working with private equity and what it's really like when you get married to the beast. And number one, number two, there's a lot of information out there about how you can be successful as you work towards a second bite doing that transaction. You've successfully done it once. You're in the process of doing it again. What have you learned from each of those points? Being successful towards a second bite exit, and being successful working with private equity, and maybe some of the biggest differences between private equity and a founder entrepreneur owned firm.
Yeah. So with a private equity versus a founder entrepreneur owned firm, it's the strategic planning. So there's definitely probably some founders that are very planning focused, but in my experience, a lot of the entrepreneurs are, very responsive to what's going on and how can we pivot and what do we do to capitalize on the market today. PE wants to do that too, but they want to understand what the risk profile is. And so being able to kind of have some breathing room to plan your strategy and to go, okay, this is where I'd like to be, that's a big difference. The other call out I would say in terms of how do you successfully work with private equity, it's really interesting because I've got the benefit of running these sales processes. And now the PE firm wants to hear all about it. Tell me about the funnel. When did people fall off? Why did they fall off? Okay, great. Now, how do we solve for those points in the funnel for next time? What were the most difficult questions that you answered in the first sale process? Great. How do we build and make those benefits this time instead of weaknesses? And so having that kind of foresight to go, this is what we know people are going to ask for next time. These are the hard questions. How do we answer them? It's really exciting because it feels like the next time around, we're going to be so strongly positioned that I can see the process going really, really well.
That's great. Thank you. Last question for you would be this. You've been, very successful in your career, been successful in your family life, talked about the challenges of balance and all like that. Is there a piece of advice or a book or a person that you read or experienced that had a lasting impact on you that you kind of carry with you all the time that you could attribute some of your success to?
Yeah, so my boss at my first internship, her name was Aubrey Zapke, and I am such a type A planner. And I was like, what should I do after college? Which job should I take? Which offer? And she was like, Erin, just make the next right choice. What makes sense for you right now? You aren't deciding your next 20 years. I mean, little did I know I did take one job and I've been there for 15 years. But it was very much, what do you like? What's the next right choice? And I think that's so impactful as a CEO as well, especially in a fast moving digital marketing business, is to go, what's the next right thing that we need to do and get focused on climbing to the top of that hill and then seeing what new information do I have? Okay, what's the next right choice? And not getting overwhelmed with where am I going to be in 5 years and 10 years, because you're constantly getting new data points. So she's been really impactful to me.
That's great. So shout out to her. And thank you for spending. This is really, you shared generously, you gave us a lot of good insight. So we're excited to watch how Perform CB will perform over the coming years, particularly in your new partnership with Behringer. We do thank the people at TriVest and trivest.com/second bite, where you register and get yourself some information on them. Erin, it was really great having you, and thank you for making time to be with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Second Bite podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.